Hello, this is our fifth video about ecology, and we're going to talk about the terrestrial and marine biomes and the cycles in nature. But before doing this, we are going to open a blank screen or a white screen and talk a bit about the first ecological or primary ecological succession. So we said that in primary ecological succession, we don't have soil, and that the main problem in primary ecological succession is the presence of the absence of soil. And we talked about pioneer organisms that can survive despite the presence of, despite the absence of soil. So the first pioneer organisms that are absolutely pioneers are the lichens, as we said before. And we said that the lichens represent a symbiotic relationship between two types of organisms. First ones are the algae, and the second ones are the fungi. First of all, we have to ask ourselves why these organisms are considered pioneer, why these organisms are considered pioneer, meaning that they can live in environments where we don't have soil and start the process of ecological succession there. Number one, because these organisms in general, or this combination of organisms, this symbiotic relationship between the algae and the fungi can withstand very little nutrition. They can withstand very little nutrition, or soil with very little nutrition. Number two, they can withstand extremes of temperature or very harsh temperatures and humidity, extremes of temperature. And they can also, and this is very important, they can erode rocks. This is very important because we talked about weathering of rocks, and that weathering of rocks is one major factor for the production of new soil. So weathering of rocks is important for initiation of soil, or of the presence of soil in the area where a disaster or a catastrophic event has removed the soil completely. Weathering of rocks, as we said, can occur as a result of wind or can occur as a result of rainfall, but it can also occur as a result of those symbionts that are the lichens. So this is why they are pioneers. Now, how are they considered symbiotic? As we said before, algae are autotrophic and they can produce organic material that helps as a source of nutrition for the heterotrophic fungi. But meanwhile, we have the fungi that provide the algae with water, because as we said before, they have rhizoids, and those rhizoids can absorb any water that is present, and meanwhile the fungus is protective to the algae. So rhizoids, and meanwhile the fungus is protective to the algae. Okay, and now we move on to the new item, which is the tropical rainforest. The tropical rainforests are usually present, as we said, near the equator, and the tropical rainforests are characterized by having abundant rainfall, and therefore when rain falls abundantly over the soil, water will evaporate from the soil, and this will result in high degrees of humidity in the air. So the rainfall is related to humidity, because if water has absorbed a lot of rain, then there will be evaporation from the wet soil, and this will result in a humid atmosphere. It's true that the surface area that is covered by tropical rain forest is small, but they still account for more than 20% of net carbon fixation or net primary productivity. So, as we said before, there are two factors that affect primary productivity. First of all, how the rate of photosynthesis, and number two, the surface area that is covered by the organism. So net primary productivity depends on the rate of fixation of carbon dioxide or the rate of photosynthesis, and at the same time, it depends on the surface area that is covered by the organism. Of course, there is a third factor, since we are talking about net primary productivity, which is how much energy is consumed by the cells themselves that carry out photosynthesis. Tropical rainforests are characterized by high diversity of species. There are plenty of species. First of all, because of the availability of water. So we have plenty of water. We have soil that is highly fertile or fertile. This is because we have plenty of forests, and the tree leaves fall on the surface of the soil and then they decay. And when they decay, we recycle the organic material in them and we return all the nutrients to the soil. So you have availability of water, availability of water, fertility of the soil, availability of sunlight, although this is a bit counteracted by this heavy canopy or cover of trees, because the trees form like a shaded area underneath. They mask or prevent sunlight from reaching the bottom. And those individual, there are plenty, of course, of organisms like reptiles, like mammals, like birds, like amphibians, and even in the plant world, we have plenty of species of plants, because they are perennial plants, meaning that throughout the year you have rain, perennial. Throughout the year you have rain, throughout the year you have solar energy, and therefore all types of plants can grow, in contradistinction with other biomes where, for example, only part of the year there is rain or rainfall in only part of the year, and the rest, for example, the weather is very dry, so there are only certain seasonal plants that can live there. So perennial means throughout the year or throughout years and years, in contradistinction with seasonal plants that can, of course, if you have if you have weather conditions that allow only seasonal plants to survive, then you will find only those plants that can or that are suitable to that season. In tropical rainforests, because of the diversity of species, of course, there are predators, whether they are human or animal predators, and there are certain species that become endangered, and we call these endangered areas the hot spots. Of course, the diversity is very high, to the extent that it's being said that a temperate forest, for example, will have 1/50 of the number of diverse animal species that is present in the tropical rainforest. And as we said, it's predominantly trees, and the trees have interlacing branches like this, and therefore you have a whole canopy or like a decorated cover that maybe shades the underneath soil and prevents sun rays from reaching the soil. And many trees are covered with epiphytes, and we're going to see what epiphytes are. We are going to see what epiphytes are on the next slide, inshallah. The canopy prevents rain from, canopy prevents, one second. A canopy prevents sun rays and rain from reaching the soil, but there is like, there are drops of water that fall. So we call this dripping of rain water. What are epiphytes that grow on the trunks of trees? The epiphytes are photosynthetic plants, of course, and instead of trying to adapt and support themselves, or instead of already being adapted to the place, they try to support themselves by attaching themselves to the trees. Okay. So they are not parasites, but these epiphytes may be dangerous because they kill the trees by blocking the light. So we can see here, first of all, we can see how dense the vegetation is. So you have dense vegetation, and in certain areas, you can find that the tops of those tall trees are interlacing together. So they form like a canopy, and that canopy prevents the sun rays and rainfall from reaching the soil. But rain can, of course, reach, because we will have dripping of rainwater. And these are the epiphytes. They are photosynthetic plants, as you see. They have green leaves, and therefore they are pigmented. Therefore, they can absorb solar energy. However, their trunks are weak, and they like wind around or turn around the trunks of bigger trees in order to support themselves. So this is not actually a symbiotic relationship, neither, of course, a parasitic relationship. They are harmful to the tree, but they are not parasites. They do not take any nutrition, for example, from the trees. They're just supporting themselves, trying to adapt to the place by supporting themselves. But actually, such epiphytes can hide solar energy and prevent it from reaching, for example, the lowermost leaves of, or the lower leaves actually, of the original tree where they are attached. So that they are harmful, but they are not parasites, because they do not absorb nutrition from the bigger trees. They are just supporting themselves. This is, of course, a top view, or maybe a plain view of an Amazon tropical rainforest, and you can see how dense the vegetation is, and you can expect, of course, that underneath those trees, heavy vegetation, and underneath this canopy, which is beautiful, sun rays reach with difficulty. This is a gauge, or a tool to measure rainfall. This is how they can know whether you can see, of course, that you have an open cylinder that receives rainfall. And inside, you can see that there is a graduated cylinder. And during a certain period of time, you can determine the volume of rainfall per unit time, for example, and know whether you have heavy raining or not. And then we have the second biome, which is the desert. And in the desert, one of the most important characteristics is that you have less than 25 centimeters of rainfall per year, according to the gauge. And even grasses and short shrubs cannot live in the desert. Only those desert plants that are well adapted can live in the desert. Of course, one of the characteristics of desert is the extreme fluctuations between the temperatures. For example, morning temperatures and night temperatures. During daytime, for example, the temperature might be 40, and at night the temperature might be 15, for example. So there are extremes. of temperature, and sometimes the daytime surface temperature of the soil can be 70 degrees Celsius, which is of course a very high temperature that cannot be tolerated by most living organisms. That's why we have very few species in the desert, only those who have the proper adaptations to can live in such a rude and rough environment. There are no vegetations, and therefore there is fluctuation, of course, and we will see the influence of vegetations. I should have mentioned it with the tropical rain forest. And as we said, in the evening and at night, the temperature drops drastically. Why do we have such stability why do we have such stability in the tropical rainforest? When we talk about tropical rainforest, I'm gonna, of course, the desert biome is characterized by instability. So I'm going to open a new screen and talk about stability in the tropical rainforest environment. So here we have because it's not written on the slides, it's just written that we have stability. So we have tropical rainforest stability. Tropical rainforest stability. Why is it stable? First of all, because of the availability of sunlight. We have availability of sunlight, and therefore you can have an almost stable rate of photosynthesis, an almost stable rate of photosynthesis. And the second main factor for stability of the tropical rainforest is the abundant vegetations. And this is mainly because of the heavy rainfall. This is mainly because of the heavy rainfall. How is this related to stability of the tropical rainforest? It is related because, of course, the vegetations have plenty of water inside them, and you know that water has a very high specific heat capacity, very high specific heat capacity, and therefore it heats slowly and cools down slowly, very high specific heat capacity. On the other hand, the desert biome, because of the absence of water mainly, is an unstable. And of course, we have the creosote bushes, creosote bushes, like these ones are famous plants that are well adapted to living in the desert. And we have the mesquite plants like this one that are also desert plants. What are the characteristics of desert plants like the creosote and the mesquite plants, or the sagebrush or the cactus? They are all, of course, drought resistant because rainfall is very, very scanty in the desert. They also have shallow roots, meaning that in the desert, we just have very little rainfall, and therefore the water of the rainfall does not reach deep in the soil. So the roots of the plant have to be very shallow roots in order to absorb that superficial water. So it has to have shallow roots in order to absorb that superficial water. But if the roots were deep, then the roots would reach areas where no water is present, so they would be useless. Okay. The examples, as we said, are the cactus. Cacti can expand to hold extra water. So they expand, the cactus itself expands in order to, the flower expands in order to hold extra water. The leaves expand to hold extra water, and they have spines, and those spines have modified leaves. Actually, sorry, I'm not sure. I think it is the stem that enlarged to because if this is the stem, then we would have the spines. I'll make sure. So actually, it's correct. It is the stem that is swollen during periods of rainfall and then gets shrunken again when we don't when there is drought in the desert. Because as you know, for example, if this is the stem, if this is, oops, if this happens. If this is the stem of a plant and this is the regular shape we know for a stem and for a leaf. In cactus plants, what happens is that the leaves look like spines, okay, because they are rolled and they are pointed to minimize the surface area. It's very distracting. So the leaves are pointed and rolled, so they look like spines in order to minimize the surface area. And why do we want to minimize the surface area? We want to minimize the surface area in order to minimize evaporation. So all the spines you can see here on the surface of cactus are nothing but modified leaves. So the spines of cactus are nothing but modified leaves. The importance of spines is dual. Part of it is that the presence of the leaf, the modified or the leaf modified as a spine, will minimize the evaporation of water. Is this important for the survival of cactus? Yes, of course, because it minimizes the water loss. But at the same time, the spines will deter predators, meaning that every time a predator will try to eat the cactus and suck the nutrients inside, it would be harmed by the spines of cactus. On the other hand, the stem swells if it happens that there is rainfall. During the rare periods where there is rainfall, we find that the stem swells. So actually, the stem increases in size, whereas the leaves are pointed like this and look like spines. And we mentioned the examples. And the desert plants, of course, there are some desert plants that are annual plants, meaning that they grow once a year and they germinate only after a hard rain. And they send up shoots and flowers as usual, meaning that they have roots, they have flowers. But what is really modified are the stems and the leaves. Now, what are the characteristics of desert animals? Desert animals should be active at night only, during at night only, because of course the weather is much better during the night period, or in a during a very brief period in the morning or in the late afternoon, in order to avoid the extremes of or the very high temperatures that are present at noon. Another way of adapting to the harsh conditions of the desert is to burrow underground tunnels and stay there during daytime in order to stay cool until night comes, and they will leave those tunnels that they burrowed under the soil, and they go outwards in order to search for food, and they might just hide in the shade. Of course, the major characteristic animals, the major desert animals that characterize the desert are rodents, of course, like mice, for example, an animal called kangaroo rat, and then we have the snakes, lizards, arachnids, insects. Very few birds can actually live in the desert. And here you can see examples So you can see the lizard, the desert lizard in Australia, the desert scorpion, the desert spider, the kangaroo rat. And if you study their characteristics, you will find that they're all adapted to living in the desert. And then we have the temperate grasslands that cover a huge area in both the tropical regions of the world and the temperate regions of the world. The temperate grasslands, of course, as the name indicates, the vegetation will be grass. They have, of course, they have more rainfall than in the desert, but the total annual fall is still very low. And it is seasonal, uneven seasonal. And therefore, this is very unfavorable for growing forests or for forest trees to grow. The animals in the temperate grasslands are essentially grazing animals that feed on grass, like the bison and the pronghorn antelope in the USA. The gazelle in Africa is a grazing animal. Or they might be burrowing animals like prairie dogs, for example. So we can see here examples of animals that love living in the temperate grassland biome because they're almost grazing animals. You can say you can see the bison, the pronghorn antelope, the wild beast, the gazelle, the prairie dogs, and to the right at the bottom, you can see, of course, how temperate grasslands look like. You can rarely find long trees there, as you can see in a forest, because of the irregularity of rainfall. So the absence of trees here is because of the scanty rainfall from one side and the irregularity of rainfall from another side, and both contribute to the inability of temperate grasslands to support long trees. And then we have the temperate deciduous forest, and the name deciduous or the adjective deciduous comes from shedding leaves. So in winter, those forests drop their leaves. They're found in the northern east of or northeast of North America and south of the taiga, meaning that once you reach temperate deciduous forest, then you know that afterward, northernmost, you will find the taiga trees or the taiga plants. Temperate deciduous forests are the weather there is a bit more moderated than in the taiga, less cold than in the taiga, and therefore they are characterized by having more species than the taiga. And they show a very important phenomenon that we call vertical stratification of plants and vertical stratification of animals, meaning that you will have, just like when we talked about Darwin finches, there were species that live on the ground. We call them ground finch. There were other finches that lived on high trees. So here again, there are species that live on the ground, other species that live on low branches, a third group of species that live on the tree tops. And of course, because there is decidual loss of leaves, as we mentioned before, those leaves consist of organic material, and once they detach from their mother tree, they will decompose by bacteria, and they will give rise to nutrients, and those nutrients will enrich the soil. What are the famous animals that live in the temperate deciduous forest? We have the squirrels, the deer, the foxes, and the bears, and all these are animals that live in cold weather, and they are well adapted to living in cold weather. For example, during the very cold winter and the snowy periods, we will find that the bears stay dormant, or they, as we say, hibernate. So they hibernate because they stay inactive and dormant in order to minimize the amount of energy that they need. And as you can see, because the temperate deciduous forests are in cold biomes, then during winter, the soil is covered by snow. And all, as you see here, and you see how, for example, in the summer, you can see that the trees are green. But in winter, you see they lost or they shed their leaves, and therefore they are leafless. And this is how they appear during autumn, for example. And because of this, the animals are mostly light in color, like the polar foxes, like the polar bears. And this is how a polar bear stays dormant during winter time or hibernates. And then finally, we have the, yes, this is the last biome. No, we still have the tundra, yes, sorry. So we have the coniferous forest or the conifer forest or the evergreen taiga. It's interesting to know that taiga, as their name indicates, they are evergreen, especially the conifers, okay, like spruce, and they are present in the northern areas of Canada, for example, and they represent the largest biome on Earth. So it is the largest terrestrial biome. It's also interesting to know that there is always heavy snowfall during winter, and that's why their branches are usually a bit sloping downwards in order to, and flexible in order to prevent being cracked by the weight of snow. So if you have rainfall or if you have snow, then this will slide over the slope of the branch or the sloping branch. Of course, there are animals that are famous for living in the evergreen taiga, like the black bear, like the lynx, like the wolverines, like the martens, like porcupines. All these are animals that live in taiga during winter, but during summer, what is really prevalent are the insects, plenty of insects because of the heavy vegetation, and plenty of birds. Of course, it possesses variable species. This is a bit similar to the tropical rainforest. So the two biomes that we highlighted by being or by having a diversity of species are the tropical rainforest and the taiga. And here you can see the male cone. It's interesting to see how the male cone is beautiful in lodgepole pine trees. Of course, this male cone is a big cone because it belongs to a big tree. Here we again we have the Appalachian Mountains. Okay, so this is how we pronounce it, Appalachian Mountains, and this is where they are located. Here they are present on the eastern north of America and to the east of Canada and of the United States. These are the taiga animals: black bear, porcupines, wolverines, elk, and moose. I just brought the pictures just in case you don't know how they look like. And then we have the tundra. This is in the far northern parts of whether North America or Europe or Asia, because we said that it follows the latitude. It follows those transverse horizontal lines that divide the Earth into biomes. It is permanently frozen. The subsoil is permanently frozen, meaning that even if you have some vegetations here, but the subsoil here is permanently frozen, even if the superficial layers are not frozen. It is found in the farthest point north of the globe, and it includes Alaska, of course. And it is called permafrost because it is permanently frozen. The subsoil is permanently frozen. We sometimes call tundra the frozen desert. And tundra receives very little rainfall, and even when there is rainfall, it cannot reach the soil because it's frozen. So it's difficult for the water drops to penetrate the frozen soil. How does it look like? I don't know whether we have a picture. Yes, we do have a picture of tundra life. And look here at this picture. It looks like very small lakes among the vegetation. And these very small lakes represent the part of the frozen water that has been liquefied again at the superficial layers. So, okay, so it has the appearance of gently rolling plains with many lakes, ponds, and bugs in depressions. And the mammals that are present in tundra are very characteristics, but it's worth mentioning that we have a very small number of species that can withstand the life in tundra. They are beautiful animals. We have to the right, we have the Arctic wolves, and then we have the caribou, we have the reindeer, and that's it. And here to the right, you still have you can still see the same description. We have like small ponds and lakes in between the vegetations, and these represent snow that has been liquefied again or converted into water. Again, we have the Arctic foxes, the Arctic hares, the polar bears, and the lemmings, and see how all the animals are well camouflaged with their environment. These are just examples of trees, yes, but are these vegetations belonging to tundra? I'm not sure. We will check all the biomes retrospectively and check what they belong to. I sometimes get the picture of a tree just for you to know how it looks like. So we have American beech, maple sugar, hickory, and oak, and it's up to you to locate and lodge every tree in the proper biome. These are the main world biomes, and you can see that it is repeated like horizontally. So this is the equator. So you can see, for example, that, and here this is the northernmost part. So you can see the tundra, which is the northernmost part. You can see it at the very north of America. You can see it as the very north of the Eurasian a continent. And then, for example, if we take like tropical rainforest, for example, here, this is the equator. So you can see tropical rainforest here and tropical rainforest there. The desert, for example, you can see the desert at the same altitude like this. Okay. Now, the last thing to discuss is a very easy concept, which is the cycles, the chemical cycles. Of course, you have heard a lot about the chemical cycles. There is a water cycle. When there is rainfall and the soil gets wet, we subsequently have evaporation of water from the surface of the earth, or we might have evaporation from the surface of the leaves that we call transpiration. So if water falls on the soil, then soil becomes wet soil, and then afterwards, when we have sun rays that hit the soil, we will have evaporation of water. But we can also have evaporation of water from the surface of the leaves, and this kind of evaporation has a particular name, which is transpiration. All this water vapor that ascends to the sky will form clouds, and then the vapor in the clouds will condense, so clouds. So we have the water vapor, that arises will condense and form the clouds, and when the clouds are too heavy, there will be rainfall. So actually, clouds are due to condensation of the water vapor. So there is water that percolates, that is dissipated through the soil particles, and then that water will finally, through inclination of the Earth's surface, reach the sea. This is a process called percolation, which is the gradual diffusion of water molecules through the soil particles in order to finally reach the sea. But actually, of course, in order for this to occur, it's much easier when the land is inclined towards the surface of the sea, which is usually lower than the level of the land. Now, the marine biomes, oceans and seas, represent 97% of water in the biosphere, and the fresh water in lakes, rivers, and groundwater, the water that is under the soil, constitutes only 1%, which is very weird. All these rivers, including the Nile, for example, represent only 1% of the water biome, and 2% of the water is locked in the frozen areas like the polar ice caps, for example. This is, of course, the water cycle. It's very easy to interpret. So here we have, for example, let's start here. We have precipitation when we have heavy clouds. And as we said before, the heavy clouds are made by condensation of water. Then there will be precipitation and there will be rainfall. So here we have rainfall. And then we have a surface runoff. As I told you, Earth or the land surface should be inclined so that this runoff of rain will descend in the lakes, and rivers, and then rivers will pour into oceans and seas, just like the river Nile, for example, pours its water in the Mediterranean Sea. And then from this huge surface area, which represents 97% of the water biomes, there would be evaporation of water. Okay, this evaporated water will condense in the sky to form clouds, and again, the cycle is repeated. So where does evaporation occur? Evaporation occurs from the surfaces of lakes, from the surfaces of rivers, oceans, but still there is a good deal of water that is evaporated via from the surface of the plants, and that we call transpiration. Okay, so actually, if we consider this number, which is 425, then 385 have precipitated in the form or condensed and formed cloud, whereas the remaining 40% will be those clouds that will precipitate as rainfall. But why is the number here 111? Because there are 71 parts that are added to the 40 parts in order to form the 111 number. And then amongst the 111 that fall on the surface of the land, the inclined land, we have like 40 that are directed towards the oceans. And if you remove 40 from 111, then the remainder is 71. Those 71 will return to the sky. So every time you get only 40 out of all this, 40 parts out of all this that reach the oceans. It needs time to calculate the total number. So how much the total is, I leave this to you. Okay. Now, the carbon cycle, of course, as we said before, photosynthesis is building up organic material from inorganic material, and organic material is any material that contains carbon and hydrogen. And we said before that photosynthesis and respiration are two reciprocal processes, meaning that what happens in photosynthesis is reversed in respiration. And this is actually the basis of the carbon cycle. So you have in photosynthesis, you have carbon dioxide and water that form glucose and oxygen. In respiration, you have glucose and oxygen that release carbon dioxide and water. In photosynthesis, the process is endothermic, whereas in respiration, the process is exothermic. What are the sources of carbon on Earth? We have, of course, the biomasses of plants and animals, the total mass of all plant and animal organisms. So the biomasses and fossil fuel are the major reservoirs of carbon. So the mass of all living organisms and dead living organisms, in addition to the fuel itself, because the fuel, the components, like for example, petroleum, the molecules themselves store energy in the bonds. Of course, the soil also contains organic material, and therefore it is a source of carbon. Fossil fuel contains organic material and is a source of carbon. Biomasses contain organic material, or are essentially organic, and contain carbon. You also have some carbon dioxide that is dissolved in the water of the oceans and seas. And there are sediments, of course, in aquatic ecosystems, sediments at the bottom of the seas and oceans. And in the atmosphere, of course, we have carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide that results from incomplete combustion of carbon. So whenever you find living organisms, this is a source of carbon. Whenever you have dead organisms, you have a source of carbon because they will be recycled. Whenever you have fuel like petroleum, then or coal, for example, this is a source of carbon. The soil itself, it's non-living, but it is a source of carbon. Water of the oceans and seas is a source of carbon because of the dissolved carbon inside. The atmosphere, of course, and the sediments at the bottom of the oceans. Of course, those sediments may result from what? Those sediments may result from dead marine organisms that have been sink at the bottom of the ocean because they are no more capable of swimming, or they might be decomposed marine organisms. So the dead marine organisms before being decomposed, or the decomposed ones, or this might be due to, so this is one source, this is a second source, and they are interrelated. And the third source is because of weathering of the earth at the bottom of the oceans by the water current. So weathering by the water current. These are a few examples of the causes of sediments at the bottom of the sea. For example, here we have what? Here we have green plants. They are living organisms. So we have living trees, and they are autotrophic. They absorb solar energy, and they absorb carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in order to form glucose. And then part of that glucose is broken down in aerobic respiration, and carbon dioxide is released. So you can just say carbon is released, but when you say carbon is released, you have to say carbon is released as carbon dioxide. Some of these plants are eaten by the animals. The animals themselves will undergo or will carry out aerobic respiration and will break down the glucose they took from their food, the animals that are herbivores took, for example, glucose, proteins, and fats from the plants. They respire and they break down the carbohydrates, especially glucose, into carbon dioxide. And then after these plants die, they will be decomposed and they will result in carbon dioxide and water again. And the carbon dioxide resulting from decay will evaporate because it's a gas. But these plants might not decay. They might be converted under high temperatures and high pressures into fuel like coal and oil. And then this fuel, sorry, will be burnt in cars and motors in order to produce again carbon dioxide that is released to the atmosphere, and the cycle is repeated. And then how many topics do we still have? We still have plenty of topics. Yes, I think so. So we can stop here and then start a new video very soon. Okay, thank you guys. Next, in the next video, I will start by the nitrogen cycle.